It's going to be a 3 and a 2 and a 1. Hello, everybody. I'm Adrian Sullivan here with Ian DeGraff. We are your Rogue Spikes, and we are excited to be talking to you about Neon Dynasty and the top cards to build with, top 10 cards to build with from Neon Dynasty. Ian, how do you feel about this set?
I'm extremely excited about this set. I love the theme, and I love the power level of the cards. A lot of creative choices that we can make with this set.
Yeah, I'm, like I said earlier, I'm a curmudgeon, an old man maybe, because I'm not super excited about the theme. I don't know, obviously we've got our cyberpunky magic stuff going on, but what I am excited about are the building blocks that can be used to solve a lot of problems that I've been wanting to solve in a bunch of different decks for Arena.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Yeah, me too. I'm actually, I know one of the things we did is we made our lists, our top lists separately, and then I kind of had us share those lists just to make sure that we weren't making some sort of really crazy talk. And you talked me off the ledge on a couple of cards. I think I talked you off the ledge on a couple as well.
I had misread the phrasing of one slightly, and that's what happens with new sets.
Absolutely.
All the time.
I was playing earlier today in a draft, and one of the things that happened is I made a horrible error because I didn't know what the card did, even though I've read the spoiler 30 or 40 or 70 times.
So that's a day one mistake. That's what we call that, right?
Yeah, indeed. So what we're going to do is we're going to get right down to it, and just before we do our top 10 cards, what we're going to do is name a couple of other cards. Our honorable mentions didn't quite make the list. Maybe a little bit more flavorful, a little bit more less apt to be an Arena card, and my honorable mention in this is, your... well, let's not do that. Is Mindlink Mech. And it's an honorable mention for me in part because when I look at this card, I think it has a lot of potential. But if you go down to it, Mindlink Mech becomes a copy of a target non-legendary creature. When I think about all the decks I want to use this in, it has so many legends, I just don't know if it gets over the top for me.
I actually have this card on my own list as number 9, and I think it has more potential than you're giving it credit. This card, first off, the idea of a creature controlling a mech is just extremely cool. I think it's some sort of a Gundam warrior being driven. But I imagine things like Thief of Sanity, Hypnotic Spectre-like cards. The crew cost is only 1. It's important to note that the mech actually does fly. Those clouds are on that picture for a reason. With only a single crew cost and a 4/3 flying, this thing hits really hard. And it can't be removed with something like a Wrath of God effect easily.
Yeah, and like I said, this is my honorable mention. It makes your top 10, and it could well be that as the format develops, maybe what we'll figure out is that this is going to be similar to other vehicles that flew and had a small crew cost.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. Well, we'll find out. So, Ian, what is your honorable mention?
My honorable mention is Besiju Who Endures. I think this is actually the strongest card in the entire set. But with that said, obviously it's honorable mention and not my number 1 choice. It doesn't have as big an impact on Arena. I think it's strongest in Eternal formats, especially ones where you can use cards like Life from the Loam to really abuse it and repeatedly destroy your opponent's non-basics, artifacts, enchantments as well.
Yeah, I mean, the cost to a card like this, because it's kind of got a Ghost Quarter style effect, an Assassin's Trophy kind of effect, Path to Exile, but, the limited number of targets, all of those other cards giving your opponent a free land, that's not anything to sneeze at. And, like you said, in Legacy, in Eternal formats of all kinds, if you're talking Vintage and Legacy, this is going to be really huge. Modern, it's going to be huge in Modern.
Very strong in
Modern,
yeah.
One of the issues that I have with it is just outside of that. I think it's a little limited, which you've acknowledged.
Yeah.
So from here, let's go to our factual top 10. My number 10, Farewell. And I know you have also had this on your list, but you've got a bit higher.
Yeah, I actually think this is my second favorite card of the set. I absolutely, completely love this card. But it's on your list as well. So tell me why it's number 10 on your list.
Yeah, number 10, for me, I look at this card, I'm like, wow, I really love it. I can do all these awesome things. And then, where I kind of ended up feeling like maybe it just didn't quite get over the hump is that I can't have artifact mana and use Farewell, which means then that I can't ramp up to it.
Sure.
At least not ramping up to it with the blue decks that I imagine using this in. And then I can't destroy Planeswalkers. Yeah, I know.
Whoa, that's the advantage.
I hear you. But, like, there aren't all that many great Planeswalkers in blue-white. And so, at that point, I start looking at Devastating Mastery. And because I'm comparing it to Devastating Mastery, what I end up doing is I end up looking at this and I see one line of text that I like, which is exile all graveyards.
Oh, that's the wonderful one.
Yeah, and otherwise, the Devastating Mastery is the card that comes to my mind for this, the reason I have it so low. You have it as a number 2, though.
Yeah, so I have it for number 2 for a couple of reasons. As a control player, or when you're playing control decks, often it's cards like vehicles or creatures that return from the yard, whether they're Arclight Phoenixes or Scrap Heat Scroungers, that can be extremely problematic that will whittle you down at doing something that, on a Wrath of God can't solve. And especially in a set that has so many good enchantments, so many good artifacts, the ability to remove all of them in all zones and also get around things that are indestructible is indispensable. There is one big drawback, though, and you've kind of touched on it already, and that is that 6 mana is a lot. It's a lot, yeah. And that is a real hurdle. But one of the nice things that we also touched on is that it doesn't hit Planeswalkers. So you can put the Planeswalker in play, and you can just get rid of everything else from all zones, except the hand, of course.
Yeah.
And then it kind of protects the Planeswalker. I think that's really fun. I know we're going to be seeing this card in some capacity, even if it's a one-of for years to come in Control.
Sure. I'm expecting that it might be a one-of in Control decks that I build. It's probably going to be a sideboard card in an incredible amount of the decks that I build. So that's my number 10. Your number 2. What is your number 10?
My number 10 is the Commie War. I actually really like this card. I realize it looks a little silly, but the one thing I've learned about playing Historic and seeing the Niv Mizzet decks especially is that 5-color mana bases are not as absurd or as difficult to manage as we once thought. We have a plethora of tri-lands that kind of really make this kind of easy. Like, how many times have you had a Kavu be 5/5 the moment it's cast?
Yeah.
So, also, this card just naturally fits in that deck anyway, just sort of as the 6th copy of Niv Mizzet, or as a way to trump opposing Niv Mizzets even. And this is the other side of it. Really fun card. The backside is it can run out of control very quickly. Returning cards to your hand, getting stronger. It's already a 6/6 flying trampler. This ability probably won't trigger more than once because they'll be dead.
Right. And I think that one of the reasons this one wasn't on my list is it just feels like it's quite narrow. There's a lot of real estate that it's fighting against in that Niv Mizzet deck. My number 9 is the Reality Chip, which has got to be one of the weirdest cards I've ever seen. A legendary artifact creature equipment jellyfish.
Absolutely. I like the concept of this card, and it almost made my list too.
Yeah, so the reason I like the Reality Chip, if you think about it in one way, it's a build your own future site. And amusingly, it costs a little bit less restrictive 5 mana than the Future Sight does. However, it's a little harder to get off the ground because Future Sight enchantments tend to be one of the most, safe permanent types.
Correct.
At least until recently when Black decided to have the color pie come after enchantments.
That's true.
But regardless, the fact that those are much more stable. Well, I like that you can drop it on 2, have it be an 0/4, and have that just be a card that helps keep you alive. And then later, when you've got the time, turn it over or attach it, and then start going. Now, this is always limited by the problem of any Future Sight deck, which is blue wants to be reactive.
Correct.
Future Sight style cards like Reality Chip want to be active, and there's a natural tension there.
Yeah, there really is, and I mean there is also the fact that this has so many card types that it makes it vulnerable to a lot of different kinds of removal. And that's one of the things I'm afraid of, is that you could really sink a lot of mana into this thing and not get much out of it because it's responded to with a shatter effect or a creature removal. And that's kind of what's kept it off my list, is just because it is so easy to hit that you may not get the payoff. And it's sort of my little hesitant on putting on the top 10.
Absolutely. Now, your number 9 we already ended up talking about, which is Mindlink Mech.
Yep.
So what's your number 8, Ian?
My number 8 is Disruption Protocol. So I love making kind of mono blue machine, March of the Machine style decks, because blue has a lot of these artifact enablers. And a card that we've had to play in the past that hasn't always been fantastic is a card called Metallic Rebuke. The problem with Metallic Rebuke is that it's very similar to the card we're talking about here. It's just that it makes things cost 3 more mana, and in the late game that just doesn't really do anything, where we get a hard counterspell instead with Disruption Protocol.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because one of the elements about Metallic Rebuke that I like is that it can be much easier to cast in the first place, being able to cast it for 1 mana, for example. And you don't get that from Disruption Protocol. But I do think that one of maybe the things I always look about is that phrase right there, 3 words, that sentence, counter target spell, period.
Also, they ask, a lot of people look at Metallic Rebuke and the improvise and they go, oh, just tap 2 artifacts. Well, if you're actually playing a machine deck, a lot of times your artifacts are tapped for other improvised cards. So, or your creatures have attacked. You don't always have the 2 artifacts to tap. So only asking 1 to be tapped is really nice.
Absolutely. So from Disruption Protocol, we're going to go to my number 8. Yours is Disruption Protocol. My number 8, March of Wretched Sorrow. Now, I know that you're a little less excited about this card than I am, but I want to talk about what is exciting to me about this card. Lantern Flare. And I bring up Lantern Flare.
I know where you're going with this.
Well, because we were hunting so hard for some life gain in the Standard and in the Artisan just before this moment. And we were hurting for it so hard, we wanted life gain in our control deck so bad that we splashed into Lantern Flare. And here, March of Wretched Sorrow. Now, obviously, this is going to remind people of Erebos' intervention, but things that I think are important to note. The additional cost, almost never going to happen, even in a blue-black deck, but it could happen.
It could, but...
the thing I like, you can target Planeswalkers. So that means that this card can quite literally be a card that can get rid of those hard-to-get-rid-of Planeswalkers. But either way, what I'm looking at is this. March of Wretched Sorrow does not... It's never going to be your only removal spell. It's always going to be in a suite of removal spells so that you can be in that situation where you're like, keeping myself alive, keeping myself alive, keeping myself alive, gain 5. Keeping myself alive, keeping myself alive, keeping myself alive, keeping myself alive, gain 8. And the game just shuts out.
I appreciate the fact that over time I've learned that control decks really do need an element of life gain. And this is reasonably elegant. I also do like the fact that if you have to, you can pay 1 mana and kill Athalia.
Yeah.
That is kind of nice. That's something that I hadn't really thought of until recently. But no, I mean, the card is not an all-star. This is not like a Terminate or something, and they're going to put 4 of in your deck, most likely. Maybe you will, but I mean...
That's very sneaky of you. Secretly, you all don't know this at home, but he hates Terminate.
I actually don't like Terminate.
He's like, this is not a Terminate, which
I know people like Terminate. I don't actually like Terminate. But I mean... what I mean by that is it's not an all-star, it's not Swords to Plowshares or something. It's not like a fantastic removal spell. What it does is it's a removal spell that gives you the breathing room to stay alive. And I will say this, I like this card a lot more if red is a strong player in the environment. I will say that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that's the case. You could probably update that to any aggressive deck, so the green deck or whatever it might be. So from here we have March of Wretched Sorrow, my number 8. And now Ian's number 7, which I also have on my list a little higher up.
This is a fantastic card. This card is called Thundering Raiju, and it reminds me so much of a card I used to play called Hellrider. And my favorite ability on creatures is haste. Haste is the best thing you can possibly do for so many reasons. Just running over and punching people in the face. They don't see the creature coming. It has a natural immunity to sorcery speed removal. And this card has incredible synergy with other things in the set. So the new modified creature kind of expression, any of the equipment works with this. Any enchantments work with this. It's just a ton of damage coming out of nowhere. And this guy also creates modified creatures. He's like the modified king, you know, like he puts the counter on things and then they deal extra damage. Even just this guy off the top, he's a 4/4.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this, when I saw this, I have a huge love of cards like this for the aggressive red decks. A lot of people know me for blue control decks. And then if you're from a different era, you might know me for aggressive red decks. And what I always love doing is something like this, where you go, turn 4, lay something that deals damage now.
Yes.
But it's a permanent. Turn 5, lay something that deals damage now. So, like, it might be something like turn 4, Thundering Raiju, turn 5, you know, a dragon, you know, and then you're coming over for a ton. Or it could even just be something along the lines of, you know, let's pretend you've got a Thundering Raiju and a Thundering Raiju, right? So you go, nothing else has happened. Maybe your opponent's at 18 life. They've done a great job of nullifying what you're doing.
Sure.
And they tap out to lay whatever, like a Planeswalker. And you're like, Thundering Raiju, maybe kill their Planeswalker. My Thundering Raiju's 4/4. It's the only creature on the table. It doesn't do extra damage, whatever. They stumble, or they don't do anything very meaningful, or they play something that's small, and on your turn 5, you cast your second Thundering Raiju. You've got a 4/4 and a 3/3. They become a 5/5 and a 4/4, and then they each deal, in this case, because of it says other, they'll each do 1. So that's 11 damage if you draw 2 of them.
Yeah.
And that's not counting the 4 from before. So you go from 4 plus 11, that's 15 damage. That's just a ton of damage. And that's without even any help, like a creature on, you know, turn 1, 2, or 3 that also has got a modification to it.
Yeah, and the icing on the cake, of course, is that this already has a boutonniere built in. There is a lightning flower on this card.
Oh, I love the flower.
Yeah.
Now, that's actually the reason that I gave it my number 3 of the set, as opposed to your number 7. Now, my number 7, this might be a card that some people will recognize. It's Spell Pierce. And, I mean, Spell Pierce is just one of the all-time just best counterspells ever. And we've seen this in Legacy. We've seen this in basically every format that it's been legal. I can't speak to Vintage, but I wouldn't be surprised if it occasionally saw play there. You're the Vintage guy, so
it's been a while. I mean, I feel like that this card may have made I can't remember.
It would be on the fringe there,
it's
right?
kind of fringy.
But I mean, if you talk about it being on the fringe of a Black Lotus format, now why I'm excited about it for the arena formats in large part. So Standard is the one that's going to be picking this up. Is that we have been looking for a card like this for a while.
Yeah.
It actually opens up archetypes like the blue aggro control decks or blue-red spells kind of aggro control decks, and really lets people do one of the more powerful things. I mean, Wizards almost never prints cards like this because they don't like aggro control existing and being good, and this is one of the cards that does that.
The only reason it's not on my list is that I've probably played this card hundreds of times already, and I just assume everyone knows how great it is, but maybe it should have made my list, you know.
I hear you. So your next card on the list is your number 6.
Yeah, so this is kind of going out on a limb here, but I really like Azusa's Mini Journeys. I think we've been really shown in the last few years how strong ramp can be. But something that's kind of gotten lost on us because we've been spoiled with cards like Uro, is that ramp doesn't always naturally have life gain, okay? Like, you don't always actually have Uro. Sometimes what happens is the little red deck runs over and beats your face in before you can cast that really great 6 or 7 drop. So what this card does is it's like, okay, look, we took away Uro, we know red's a thing, so Act 2 of this play, you get 3 life.
Right.
On Act 3, I'm going to give you a 3/3 body. Yes, it has another ability, but it might as well say nothing. It's just a 3/3 body. If it's against control, it'll punch them in the face. Great. You know, it's just one other thing. Like, have you ever wanted to attack with your Explorer? Have you ever wanted to gain life with your Explorer instead of drawing a card?
Yeah.
This is your card.
Yeah, I actually tried to push back on you on this card until you made the comparison to Explore. Because when I think about it in that way, instead of drawing a card, I get a 3/3 that gains life. Okay, I accept that the card is a card to think about. So that is your number 6. My number 6, Invoke the Winds. Now, you and I have been playing Bill Stark's mono blue, I'll call it mid-range blue deck for a while now, and that deck runs Mind Flare,
Yep.
and it runs other control cards. And one of the things that's so frustrating is that the control magics are so great and so limiting.
Correct.
And this actually solves so much of that because you steal it forever. They can't get it back with enchantment removal. They can't get it back with removal of any kind. They have to just, it's yours. They've got to kill it if they want to get it back. And it's not limited by casting cost. It's just take it. You steal it. And the important thing besides that,
Oh, it's the
Untap.
untap. Oh, yeah.
I mean,
That's very
you
rare.
know?
Control effects in blue, not red. In blue, never untap. This
Yeah.
is really exciting. The only reason it doesn't make the cut is that quad blue. So you're very much stuck in a blue deck with this. You're not going to just, you're not going to just splash it. Interestingly enough, only a few years ago we had Confiscation Coup, and this card just makes Confiscation Coup look terrible.
It's funny too, like, and the untap. One of the reasons that that's so huge is if you've ever been in the situation where you're going down, you're having, the worst attacks on you ever. You're like falling behind, and you're like, wow, I have a control magic effect here. I have to take this crappy creature so I can block.
Yeah.
No longer. You can take the good one and then be like, it's untapped. Come for me.
And once again, pointing out that this also does grab artifacts.
Yes.
Which certainly can matter. Maybe grabbing an Azeka's Chariot or a Mindlink Mech.
Absolutely. I love that you bring it back to the Mindlink Mech. So that's my number 6. Our number 5, and I say our number 5 is because we both have this listed as number 5.
Interestingly enough.
Lizard Blades.
Fantastic. This is probably my favorite reconfigure card in the set. I realize that this card is not Embercleave.
No.
But it's reaching towards that feeling. Like, I think we all have learned to respect double strike in low to the ground red decks.
Yeah.
The fact that this has a body too is also really exciting.
I mean, how often has this happened? Either you're the person playing Embercleave, or your opponent is the person with the Embercleave, and it sits there alone on the table, wishing it could do something.
Oh, absolutely. That's happened all the time. And as a control player, often I will just blow up all their guys and leave the Embercleave intact, knowing that I can counter the creature off the top of the deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I'm playing the beatdown, I've had the exact opposite happen, where it's just like, I have the Embercleave and I'm like looking at it and I'm like, here's my empty table, and do I just cast this onto the table and just have it sit there? Lizard Blades doesn't mind. Lizard Blades is like, well, at the very least, you're going to get 2 damage out of me. And what I also really love about it is it has kind of the opposite effect of Embercleave, where Embercleave can just kind of rot on you. Lizard Blades, not only can you put it into play and then immediately put it on like a creature to go in, but you can kind of hide it from mass removal by putting it on a creature.
Oh, yeah.
So you put it on the creature, it's double striking, which is awesome. And then if they blow up the world, you've got a creature.
Well, I mean, unless it's farewell. But one thing that's really important to point out on this card, compared to a lot of the other reconfigure cards that people are bringing up, is the cost of reconfigure on this card is extremely low.
Yeah.
We're not taught. This is a very little investment, and that's really important. A lot of the greedier reconfigure cards just aren't going to happen that often, and this is perfectly costed for a red deck.
Absolutely. And there's so many cards in red that have a significant power. And so if you're just able, if you imagine, we've played in Legacy, an Umezawa's Jite, or Jit, I never remember which is the proper.
I don't either.
And you spend your 2 mana to equip. It's a totally reasonable amount of mana for an equip cost in Legacy.
Yes.
When you bring it down to smaller formats like Standard, that becomes well within the range. So when you're doing something like this, right, let's pretend you have a dragon out, and you're like, well, I've drawn a lizard blades, so I've got the mana because I've already spent my 4 mana on my dragon to go 2 mana, 2 mana. Now it's 4 mana, or sorry, a 4/4 flying double striker.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, next turn they kill it. I've still got my lizard blades.
Also interesting to point out that this has synergy with a card that we already talked about. Do you remember?
Go ahead.
The Thundering Raiju.
Absolutely.
Giving something double strike and then more damage and possibly counters is just really silly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now we're going to move on to my number 4. Again, a card you might find familiar, Essence Capture. And I actually really love the art for this, but one of the things about a card like Essence Capture, whether you're thinking about Essence Capture from, a few sets ago, well, many sets ago now, or Essence Scatter, which is the same card as this, but easier to cast and no bonus to your creatures. Counter target creature spell is a very powerful ability. And if you've played Artisan at all, you probably saw those moments where Disdainful Stroke became kind of like just a thing you did in that format, in part because there were almost always creatures to counter, and there were very few cards that were cheap counters for a creature. Now to have Essence Capture in Standard, it's just a fantastic thing to do, especially because now you've got, let's say you want to cover the bases, Essence Capture plus Negate, both legal and standard. You can have them both in your deck and just be ready to stop whatever.
And it's also really important to point out that Essence Capture is better than it's been before because of the new modified creature ability.
Yes.
So things that check, like it wouldn't be impossible to imagine a blue-red deck that has both Essence Capture and Thundering Raiju. I keep bringing this card up, but like it's certainly possible that could happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, your number 4 is one that is not on my list.
So I love this card. I know it feels like a little Timmy-ish. I mean, I'm aware of this. People are like, oh, is that a commander card? Is that a little kid card? I actually think it has a lot of muscle for 5 mana. So you have a 5/5 flying dragon. Dragon being important because of things like power word kill. It has menace, so it has double evasion, making it very difficult to block. If your opponent is a control deck and just wants to remove it with a creature removal, say, I don't know, Terminate we'll bring up again, they're immediately going to get hit with a Mind Rot effect and lose 2 life and then be out the card. So they're out 3 cards for doing that. If you're playing against a deck that's more aggressive than you, you can block with this guy and possibly reanimate a card like a Ravenous Chupacabra or something with a coming into play trigger. I just really like the amount of value you're getting out of this creature for 5 mana. I think it's not something you can just ignore as a little kid's card anymore, because like oftentimes when we used to see dragons, we think of like Shivan Dragon, they would never see play in Standard. But I think this card has the chops to actually be a viable card in Standard.
Yeah, it's funny because I certainly recognize that it's got potential utility in those ways that you're saying. And it's not on my list, but one of the things I like about Kamigawa Dragons at Large is what happens when you cast the second one. And I actually think both of these are very, very reasonable cards to cast your legendary extra copy into play just to get the die trigger.
Sure.
I'm not super excited about Junji, but that's okay because I recognize all the things you've said. Now, from there, we're going to go to your number 3 card.
This is Sokuzan, the Crucible of Defiance. So when I first saw this card, I kind of ignored it because I was so enamored with some of the other channel lands that we've already talked about and maybe might talk about in the future. But I recognize that this card compares very favorably to Ramanap Ruins in a lot of ways. So one of the ways that control decks beat red decks is at some point they'll have, used a card like a Wrath of God effect. They'll neutralize the attackers, and the red deck is just drawing off the top, and they're going to hit like 2 or 3 mountains in a row. They'll stumble, and then the control deck will catch up. This means that some of your mountains are actually 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens. With haste. Which is really exciting because like this can be cast at end of turn or it can be cast on the turn. The fact that they're colorless might matter with protection from red, which I don't know is as much a thing as it used to be anymore. But you're really getting this effect for a very similar cost to Ramanap Ruins. And remember, Ramanap Ruins had to be banned. So
that's
like,
true.
so like, if you're telling me that this card is like pretty close, in some ways a little worse, in some ways a little better, because the tokens stick around, the Ramunap just is the one shot of 2 damage, it's at least worth thinking about. And I have to imagine that every red deck going forward in Standard at least is going to be at least having to look at this card.
Yeah, when I was working on my list for our top 10, one of the things that I did is I put what I like to think of as my very expansive, generous list of the cards I like. And this was on there with about 30 or 40 cards of cards that I know I'm going to be playing with. It just didn't make the cut for me because I felt like it was just slightly below my number 10, which was Farewell. But it's very close. I think the card's great. I think we're going to definitely have it see play. So that is Sokensen, Crucible of Defiance. And my number 3 was one that we've already talked about, which was Thundering Raiju. So we'll go on to my number 2, which shares a mechanic here, the channel mechanic. Now, my number 2, and I know that you think this is way too high, is Twinshot Sniper. Now, why is it number 2? Basically, I think that every aggressive red deck, if they run direct damage, they will be running 4 of Twinshot Sniper. I think it compares pretty favorably to Sudden Shock. And I can tell you, having played Sudden Shock at Pro Tour, having played Sudden Shock at so many other events, even if Sudden Shock doesn't do what it did in certain moments, where Sudden Shock could say, for example, kill an Arcbound Ravager before the Ravager could do anything meaningful because of the split second. That was not how I used it most of the time. Most of the time I used it for the essentially uncounterable damage. And here we have damage that is uncounterable, barring cards like Stifle. And so if you think about it like this is not a 4-drop with Channel 2. This is a 2-drop with Kicker. And the Kicker is a body. Now, where this comes into mind, for example, is I want to say it's the Electrostatic card that was printed in Artisan. We've seen a lot of people using this card where it's like, deal 2 damage to a target, and then the next time you cast an instant or sorcery, then you can get an extra bonus, and that made the cut. This is similar, but better in a lot of ways, because one of the things that doesn't happen is when you've got the time to get the extra, you always get it.
Sure.
I just think this card is utterly fantastic, and I think about so many games where I was playing against an opponent like, let's say, Psychotog. This is going way the heck back. And I'm like, well, here's some uncounterable damage. And they go, wah, 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 I'm dead. And in more modern moments, just going over the top a little bit is all it takes.
So there's a couple things on here that I missed the first pass. One is that it is actually a goblin, which makes it better, just by virtue of there being so many goblin lords. The second thing that I want to ask you is, like, how do you feel this card compares to classics like Flame Tongue Kavu or more recently Ravenous Chupacabra?
Okay, well, so let's use Flame Tongue Kavu, the good old FTK. FTK, one of the aspects of FTK was FTK warped the format to such a degree that people stopped playing creatures that died to it if they cost more than 4 or more mana. And they started reconsidering casting creatures that cost 3 or less mana that died to it. But, FTK also would kill itself.
Yes, it did.
And this card, I think one of the reasons it's comparable to FTK is, and I know that's a bold statement, one of the reasons it's comparable to FTK is because it has something in here as well. It has the Face Tongue ability. If you're spending your 4 mana on it and you're like, face, that is a significant deal. And, the ability to have it go either way, plus the access to shooting planeswalkers, which is more relevant these days. I just think this card is comparable in that. Now, your second card that you had suggested comparing it to was what?
Ravenous Chupacabra, another coming into play 4-drop.
The difference between Ravenous Chupacabra and this, of course, is that Ravenous Chupacabra in the formats where it was legal when it was first printed was basically an all-star. Necrotol, Ravenous Chupacabra, all of those things have been an all-star. I think this is actually slightly better than that. And I think it's better than that because that channel ability is just really, it's just huge.
I think you may have talked me more into this card. I'm going to have to reconsider it. I have a feeling I'll be playing some of these.
So your number 2, we've already talked about. That
Yep.
was Farewell, which I
Farewell.
had as my number 10.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already gone through Farewell, which is, again, a card we're certain to see play. But your number 1.
So I realize a lot of people love this card, but I want to point a few things out about Tezzeret. Tezzeret has always made an impact. If you look at every printed Tezzeret, they have all shown up. Even the 5-mana Tezzeret the Seeker has shown up in Vintage as being an all-star. The Betrayer of the Flesh is just in a long lineage of fantastic Tezzerets. So the first ability is not one, the passive ability. This is kind of going back to War of the Spark, where we get passive abilities on Planeswalkers. The ability to have something cost 2 less, it's very likely that your filter effects may actually generate mana on a little like chromatic stars or something like that. Your second ability is just digging for cards. Drawing 2 and then discarding an artifact is a great value as a +1. The second ability, one of my friends, your friend too, BK, often talks about the Planeswalker test, which is that if a Planeswalker can't defend itself, it's not worth its salt, kind of.
Yeah.
And so this Planeswalker is perfectly capable of just animating any old artifact and making it a 4/4. And that's fantastic because a lot of the artifacts that you're going to end up playing are kind of subpar anyway, or like they've done their trick.
Yeah, and one of the things that's kind of cool about that is that if it happens to be a vehicle, it's just going to be whatever the size of the vehicle is. So if you've got like a huge vehicle that like has a crew of 12, or I'm making up these absurd numbers, it doesn't care. It's going to be whatever huge it is. It doesn't have to just be a 4/4. It can be better than that.
And then also it's so easy to get to 6. It's just 2 activations and then you get this bonkers emblem. Whenever an artifact you control becomes tap, draw a card. It's so easy to do that because a lot of your artifacts either tap for mana, are creatures so they just attack, or you can do things like use Disruption Protocol to tap a thing, or you can do Metallic Rebuke style effects. It's just so easy to use the final ability.
Yeah.
I think that it's important to recognize that Tezzeret is a build-around. It's not just like, you're not just going to throw it into everything. It's going to take the right environment, but it's going to be a hell of a build-around is what I'm saying.
Well, and one of the aspects of this card, that ultimate ability, is usually, I feel like when we see abilities like this, the most common way we see it is that those cards get an activated ability. The fact that it's a triggered ability is like a world of difference. I'm just like picturing somebody playing Commander or some other format where they've made like 12 mirror, and they're like, "Aha! I've made 12 mirror. Now they attack."
Yeah, very very exciting. Very exciting.
And the only reason that this one didn't make my list, it's very similar to Junji. I think I'm viewing this as primarily a standard world situation. And I'm just not sure how I see it coming to play for standard, if there's enough artifacts for it to really get there. So it's on my playables list, cards with possibility, but it's not on my top 10 list.
Sure.
So for my number 1, I think it's in many ways weaker than a lot of the cards that I've talked about in certain situations, but what I think of it is so powerful contextually.
Sure.
That's Odawara, the Soaring City. And you brought up earlier Sokenzen, and I think that some of the things you said there are very, very applicable here as well. Because one of the aspects of Sokenzen Crucible of Defiance is that turning your lands into spells is meaningful. We can think of both of those cards, every card in this cycle, Boseiju, etc., as double-face cards. They're de facto double-face cards.
Correct.
And so as a double-face card, if we think about Odawara, the Soaring City, as a double-face card, it's an excellent ability because if you look at that list of permanents that I can return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. One of the key words I see on there is, or maybe I should put this the other way around. One of the key words I don't see on there is whatever. Because you'll have a lot of bounce spells that they can't target, for example, a man land or creature land.
Sure,
and
that's true.
Odawara can totally go there. There is no permanent other than a simple land, a land that is only a land, that it cannot bounce. Now that's significant, and one of the aspects that makes it particularly significant is that when you're fighting against all of the different jostling that you'll do in numerous matchups, you can have a higher land count for your controlling deck, or even for your, that kind of Bill Stark blue deck that we were talking about before, where your land count is much higher, but you have this as a uncounterable super unsummon, or whatever you want to call it. And if you think about it, it's actually like close to an uncounterable boomerang, because all of the other versions of this could never hit a land.
Yeah, it's a fantastic card. It's absolutely completely fantastic.
But, to think about what's one of the cards that is going to be seeing play moving forward, and it's going to be more hull breaking, and the uncounterable nature of that 7-drop is even more important because they've just banned Divide by 0.
Yeah,
and so
that's fair.
One of the aspects then is Odawara lets you fight that in a significant way. And, if you're a more aggressive deck, being able to have this in your more aggressive deck and just say to a deck that is more controlling, no, that's off the table. Here I come. So this is my number one. And, you what's your feelings about it?
I mean, I find all of these cards extremely powerful. And I think that the only reason that you don't see me, like, maybe it wasn't my number one or didn't make my list is because, I already had several of them on my list. But also, we've kind of been spoiled a lot lately. We've had the double face cards. We've had the Jawari disruptions. We've had that whole suite of cards. So we're kind of used to, our lands can just be spells. So maybe it seems a little less exciting that we get a boomerang on this double face one. But because of the way this is phrased and it's worded, and the fact that it comes into play untapped, even though it's a legendary land that you can kind of get rid of the other ones, I think it definitely makes the cut. And we're going to be seeing all of these lands see play in multiple formats.
Yeah, I'm imagining, like, if we just stick to standard, that this is going to be a de facto one of in control decks, could be a more of in control decks. One of the things that it gets to do, you can bounce your own stuff. Like, that's nice. If anyone has looked at my control decks over the years, it has been incredibly common that I have had even bad bounce where I've had, like, disperse. Like, where I, top 8 at a Grand Prix with a disperse in my deck. And why? Because it could bounce anything. This can do that. Now, obviously, channel for 4. What that, means is that it's going to cost a little bit more, but only sometimes. Because right now, Blue has a ton of incredible legendary creatures. And so I just see this being a card that you can use in a blue control deck, that you can use in a blue mid-range deck, that you can use in, like, spellsy aggressive decks, whether they're kind of aggro control style blue or, like, blue-red style decks. That this card, I think, is just going to be all over the place.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic, and the whole cycle of lands has just been such a refreshing thing to see in the spoiler. I was really excited about them.
Yeah. So what's your take overall for this set?
I think the one thing my big takeaway of this set is that the set is incredibly powerful. I haven't seen a set this dense with cards and possible strategies
and words.
And many of the cards being double-sided too. It's just been it's very, very exciting, and there's just a lot of depth to it. I think this format's going to take longer to sort out. The effects of the set are going to take time to sort out, even with the millions of magic minds kind of working day and night. It's going to take time to kind of, like, figure out. It kind of reminds me, and I hate to use this example because I think it could get lost in translation, but when you had a set like Urza Saga, and then you banned a bunch of the cards initially, there was a whole other wave of powerful cards.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the case where there's, like, waves and waves and waves of powerful cards and effects that are going to take time to really fully utilize.
Yeah, we're going to be presenting all of this information to you in less than, say, an hour. But if we wanted to, we could have made probably a 4-hour video just talking about all of the cards that mattered.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are so many cards that are going to matter, we couldn't get to them all.
Yeah, I mean, we could have made our top 50. And I mean,
yeah.
like, if we were talking about older formats or limited, or I mean, like, we could have really expanded the breadth and the depth of this. But this is just the cards that we're excited to build with right away.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially focusing primarily on Arena as a platform for those games, because I think that if you go beyond Arena, and whether you're talking about Pioneer or Modern or Legacy, any of those formats, there's going to be even more things to be thinking about with regards to a bunch of these cards. Obviously, one of the cards that you brought up was the new Boseiju, obviously going to be one of the biggest impacts in a lot of those older formats, but in this current moment, one of the things I'm really loving about this set is that while they did not give me all of the tools I might have been hoping and pining for years, oh God, I really wish they'd print, an artifact for my artifact deck. Okay, they didn't give me everything, but they gave me so much.
Yeah.
And I know that there's going to be a lot of brewing that I'm going to be doing with these cards.
And just as a side note, I love the aesthetic of this set. I mean, I kind of made a few jokes about that already throughout this with, the spirit with the boutonniere on it.
Oh, that flower is awesome.
I really do love the aesthetic, the idea of a cyberpunk future with dragons and maybe the Phyrexians, just kind of an interesting idea that I didn't see coming. So I was kind of excited about that.
It's funny because I also didn't see it coming, though the phrase Neon Dynasty gave me a slight hint towards that. But I'm the curmudgeonly old man, even though I love reading Neuromancer and other kinds of like cyberpunk classics. I guess I like my fantasy for Magic to be all set in the same world, and not the same world as in the same planes, but I like the sense of it having that aspect of kind of a more classic fantasy. So this just felt like a strange departure.
You mean the mechs?
Yeah. And then the other part of it that I was kind of a little sad about, because this is a flavor point, right? Is I kind of liked, even though I don't pay attention to a lot of storyline things, I kind of liked the mystery of the Wanderer, and I don't like that the mystery has been solved.
Oh, you know how they solved the mystery though? If the wind blew, her hat would fall off, and you know who it was. Like that was how you solved the mystery. It wasn't that big of a deal. It's like.
Oh, Ian. So, I think that there's a lot of good stuff to be looking forward to with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty.
Yeah.
I'm pumped.
Yeah.
And, I'm expecting that we're probably going to end up charging into the new standard format, and probably some other formats as well with some of these cards. And do you have any final thoughts before we say arrivederci?
I was going to say, if you have any cards that you liked on our set list that you want us to build with, let us know, and we'll see what we can come up with.
Absolutely. And, also, this video is going to be going online not too long from now. And if you think we missed something, let us know. And, we are just getting started with some of this video production. So obviously, there's some sparse elements that you can see here, but we are going to be expanding it too. And tell your friends about us. Let them know that you've got some great things that we're going to be bringing to you. And, we'll be seeing you next time. I'm Adrian for Ian, and we're both the wonderful, wonderful Rogue Spikes.
Yeah.
Woot woot. Have a good one, everybody, and we'll be playing some Magic with you soon.